Okay, welcome in. It's now Friday, so I figured it's good as time as any to do my previews for the divisional matchup with the NFL playoffs. I managed to get all four games on the screen, so I shouldn't have to scroll. I may have to do this so my phone doesn't go to pitch black and then I lose the background. But anyways, so let's dive in. So last week, 6 games, I had four right, two correct. So for the postseason, I'm starting off 4-2, not too shabby. So I'm going to jot that down as I'm speaking, and let's dive in. So the first matchup we have 2 games on Saturday and 2 games on Sunday. The first one takes place in Kansas City as the back-to-back reigning defending Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, had by far their best record-wise season. But in my opinion, maybe last year, the year before, or when they won their first championship, or their first one with Mahomes, I guess, back in the 2019-2020 season, I'd say those teams were a little bit more dominant. This Chiefs team, it seems like, yes, they were 15-2, but they could have easily been like 12 and, what is it, 12-5 or 13-4. Like they got, there was a number of games, and you'd have to go back and check on it. But like one game that stands out to me was when Denver, when they went into Kansas City the first time, lined up for a field goal, it got blocked, and then there was another game against the Bengals where, if they didn't have this happen or that happen, they could have lost. So I don't want to say they were lucky, but they didn't really blow away their opponents or their competition. A lot of their games were one-score games, whether it be 3 points or less or a touchdown or less. Again, they weren't that dominant. Let's be realistic here. So they're taking on they're taking on the Houston Texans, the number 1 seed and number 4 seed respectively. This is going to be the 16th time that these two teams have met. They've met twice in the postseason. The first time was back in the 2015-16 season, January 9th, in a wild card matchup. Houston won their division. Kansas City was a wild card team at that point. They had Alex Smith as their quarterback. Brian Hoyer was the quarterback for the Houston Texans, and Kansas City shut out Houston 30-0. The last time they met was in the 2019-20 season. It was a divisional matchup. And there was Mahomes and Deshaun Watson were the quarterbacks for the respective squads. And despite the fact that the Houston Texans had a 21-0 lead on Kansas City in KC, mind you, Kansas City would end up blowing out the Texans 51-31. So basically, they were up 21-0, and then they got outscored 51-10 for the rest of the game. And that was a divisional matchup. So this is going to be their second divisional matchup in the team's histories that they played against each other. They've never met in the championship game. But again, they have met in the wild card 8 years ago. So obviously Kansas City won both those games. So they have a 2-0 lead when it comes to the postseason record. Okay, so the Texans are coming off a big win against the Chargers. They will be taking on, I guess, the AFC West. So they'll be taking on their second AFC West opponent as they beat the Chargers last week. And now obviously they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs this week. For KC, they're looking to go for they're looking for their third straight Super Bowl, and they very well can do it because a win here, they'll be guaranteed one more home game before they fly out to New Orleans for Super Bowl 59. It's never been done before for the three-peat, that is, before in the NFL, but I mean, records are made to be broken, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. What else do I have written down here? Already talked about their season. So I got KC all day in this one. I don't think Houston really has much of a chance. I see them winning by at least 2 scores. I know I talked about before how they won a lot of close games during the season, but once the playoffs come around, they really start to kick it in gear and really start to get their ish together, if you know what I'm talking about. So I think Kansas City wins this game. I know I normally do my predictions when it comes to scores with my live videos, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do it this week. So just for spits and giggles, I'll say what I think the scores will be for the 4 games on tap. So I wrote down 33-17. I can easily see Houston getting a couple of touchdowns and a field goal, but that's about it. I think Kansas City will eventually take over the game and move on to the championship game at home. Okay, the game on the right has the Detroit Lions as they play host to the Washington Commanders. Now, obviously, if both home teams win on Saturday, then that means the opponents on Sunday know they have to travel to either Kansas City or Detroit, respectively. They have no shot of playing a home game unless KC and Detroit get upset. So for the Detroit Lions and the Washington Commanders slash football team slash Redskins, this will be the 48th time that these two teams will compete against one another. They have met 3 times in the postseason. The first time was in the 1982-83 season, January 8th, 1983 to be specific. Washington was the home team. It was a wild card matchup, and they would win that 31-7. So a bit of a blowout to say the least. 9 years later, in 1992, they would meet January 12th. Washington would win in a championship game, so the Super Bowl was on the line. That's as close as Detroit got to a Super Bowl in the modern day era, at least. And they would blow out the Lions 41-10. The last time these two teams met was in the 1999-2000 season in a wild card game, January 8th to be specific. And once again, Washington hosted Detroit, and they would go on to win 27-13. So Washington won all 3 previous games, obviously under the Redskins name at that during that time. So they obviously have a 3-0 series, a playoff series lead against the Lions. This is going to be the first time these two teams have ever met in a divisional matchup. As I said previously mentioned, they have won 2 wildcard games and the championship game back in '92. So this will be a first for the Lions and the Commanders, and this will be the first time that Detroit has hosted a playoff game against their opponent. Okay, so the Commanders are coming off their first playoff win in 18 years. Ironically, they beat Tampa Bay last week, and they beat Tampa Bay back in '06, both in a wild card matchup with that, and both played in Tampa. So same setting, 18 years apart, and the same result would end up taking place. I've said this before that Jaden Daniels has proven to me that he's not only Offensive Rookie of the Year, but he's actually proven to be a pretty good, I don't want to say elite quarterback, but the guy has taken a team that wasn't competitive the last couple of seasons, and he's put the weight on his shoulders, and he seems to be just riding this out. And they obviously had a huge, I don't want to say an upset win over the Buccaneers, but they had a huge win last week. And obviously in his first year, his first playoff game, got his first win. Now he's going into Detroit. I mean, I'm not saying Tampa's not a hostile environment, but it's an outside event. Like, it's an outdoor facilities, whereas Detroit, it's a dome. So if you think it gets loud at a regular NFL stadium, wait until there's, like, you go into a place where there's a roof and there's no outside weather affecting the outcome of how the game is affected. I can see this being a very hostile environment. I mean, if I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a fan of any team in the NFC, but if any team in the NFC deserves to get a shot at the Super Bowl, it's the Lions. I've said before that never made it in the modern day Super Bowl era. They probably won prior to like 1967 when the Super Bowl first happened. But these fans are hungry. They've been waiting a long time. They've suffered for so long. So I think it's going to be tough for Washington to go into Detroit. Just my personal opinion. What is this? So just getting back to Washington, then I will talk about it again on Detroit. So they are the number 6 seed, and if they go into Detroit and somehow pull off an upset, it would be a huge upset to say the least. And if they can pull this off, they could go on a run. Because if they could beat Detroit, there's no reason why they can't go into Philly and beat Philly. They already beat them in the regular season, or go into Los Angeles if that is an NFC championship game at all. But they could go into LA and pull off a win there too, and they wouldn't be the first number 6 seed to go to a championship game or possibly a Super Bowl. And I'm not trying to get any Commanders fans get their hopes up saying that they can go all the way, but anything can happen on any given Saturday or Sunday, respectively, especially when it comes to the NFL. So if you're the Lions, yes, you are the better team on paper, but don't take this game for granted, because if you start looking ahead to, okay, we're going to host the NFC Championship game, and the Commanders are like, okay, well, we're going to have a chip on our shoulders because you're not taking us seriously, then who knows what can really happen. But yeah, I just wanted to say that one little piece. Now I'm going to get on to the Lions. So they had an almost perfect season. They only lost 2 games. They had the same record as the Chiefs, 15-2. Therefore, they had the number 1 seed in the NFC and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So they're obviously hosting the Commanders. And if they win this, they would play the winner of the Rams or the Eagles at home. And they made it all the way to the championship game last year, lost in San Fran. So I'm sure they learned their lessons from last year, and they're looking to take those lessons and hopefully get this team over the hump and get into a Super Bowl, like I said, for the first time ever. Okay, so one thing I'll say with Dan Campbell, I know I don't really talk about coaches, but you want to talk about a guy that like the players would literally run through a wall for. Like they would like do anything they could to appease this man. And I know I've seen a few clips where certain analysts were talking about, well, if Dan Campbell coached this team or coached that team, they might not have the same effect. It's just like a marriage made in heaven with him and Detroit. I'm pretty sure he used to be a player for the Lions. So it's almost like it's coming full circle. You play for the team, now you're coaching the team. And obviously, I'm sure he's in on a lot of their decisions when it comes to trades, drafting, free agency signings, and all that other jazz. So, and obviously other coaches as well. So it's just amazing to think that his first year was in 21-22. They went 3-13, and that was the last time that the NFL had a 16-game regular season. And the following year, it got to a 17-game season. I think they went 9-8, just missing out on the playoffs. Last year, they obviously won. They obviously had a much better record, and then they would end up hosting a divisional game. I think they beat Tampa last year, if I'm not mistaken, and then they obviously went on to play San Fran in the championship game. And here they are, 15-2, the best team in the NFC, and a real contender for a Super Bowl. So it's crazy to think how like 3 or 4 years have gone by, and there's been so much improvement with this team. And I know for the longest time they were like the laughing stock of the league. And whenever you thought about the NFC North, you always thought about Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago, maybe. But I think like Minnesota and Green Bay pretty much dominated the NFC North, just my opinion at least. And now Detroit's finally coming around. They got a good team, and they are now the team to beat in the NFC. So for Jared Goff, he's no stranger to the postseason. He helped the Rams get to a Super Bowl in the 2018-19 campaign. Unfortunately, they lost to the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. So he has yet to return to a Super Bowl, but this is probably his best chance since 6 years ago, was it? Yeah, it was 6 years ago now. Hard to believe. So in Jared Goff's 9-year tenure as a quarterback between the Los Angeles Rams and the Detroit Lions, he's made the playoffs 5 out of 9 seasons. So that's pretty good. That's just over halfway. And like I said before, he obviously made it to the Super Bowl with the Rams a few seasons ago. So he has the experience, and I'm sure he's very comfortable. Now, the one thing I will say with Goff is, unlike the Daniels, like a lot of quarterbacks, I'd say at least 85% of the quarterbacks, maybe even 90% of the quarterbacks, they're a dual threat, which means you can pass it or you can run it. For me, Jared Goff is kind of like, reminds me like a Matt Stafford. And I know that those two guys got traded for each other 4 years ago, whatever it was. But to me, Goff is more like a pocket passer. So it's more like he's going to sit in the pocket and, oh, my screen just shut off. Sorry. Hold on a second. I knew this was going to happen. Anyways, so yeah, that's what I said. I got to start doing that from now on. But he's more of a pocket passer, in my opinion. So if the Commanders can like close in on him and make him feel uncomfortable, they're probably better off just blitzing up the middle just to make him get out of his comfort zone. If they don't bring that many players, if they only try to rush 4 guys, they obviously have 5 or possibly 6 linemen on your offensive side. So if there isn't much pressure on Goff, he could probably have a field day with this defense and throw for like 200-300 yards. But again, if he's uncomfortable and you have to make the guy run out, if you're not used to running, obviously it's going to play a bit of a factor into how you're going to play. So I think the best chance for the Commanders to win this game is to pressure Goff and make him feel as uncomfortable as possible. But if the O-line can hold up and prevent him from getting a lot of sacks, then I think Detroit should get this matchup, to say the least. And one other thing for Detroit was they are getting a lot of their players back. And the big thing with the bye week for the Lions and Chiefs respectively is if you had anybody injured or they weren't 100%, they take that week, obviously the wild card week, to rest up and get ready for the divisional matchup, which takes place tomorrow. So they got a lot going for them, and I feel like I could talk about the Lions and this matchup for a long time, but I'm already 60 minutes into this video, and I'm only halfway through my predictions. So I'll sum it up really quick. I have Detroit win this game. I'll say 31-20. Okay, the next matchup, or the next two matchups take place on Sunday. The first one is in Philly, as the Eagles are playing host to the Los Angeles Rams. So this is going to be the 46th time that the Eagles and Rams have played each other respectively. And this is both between Los Angeles and St. Louis, and then back to Los Angeles for the Rams. Philly's always been in Philly, so there wasn't a whole lot of moving there. This is going to be the fourth time that these two teams have met in the postseason. The first time was way back in 1949, December 18th to be specific. The Eagles shut out the LA in Los Angeles 14-0, and that was the NFL championship game. So this was almost 2 decades before the Super Bowl era happened, where Philly got their championship, but it didn't count as a Super Bowl ring at that time. These two teams would meet about 50 years later, 1989, December 31st, so New Year's Eve. LA went into Philadelphia for a wild card matchup, and LA would win 21-7. The last time these two teams met was in the 2001-2002 season, January 27th, 2002 to be specific, in a championship game in St. Louis, and the Rams would win that contest 29-24 en route to a Super Bowl appearance. So the Rams lead this playoff series 2-1 so far. All right, so the Rams got their first playoff win since winning the Super Bowl back in the 2021-22 season. They had a dominant performance against the Vikings in their wildcard matchup in Arizona. And for those that don't understand what's going on in LA, or maybe if you live under a rock, I'll do a brief little thing. The reason the game got relocated was because of all the wildfires that happened in Los Angeles. And before I continue on with my predictions and talk about this, I really can't emphasize how we really can't take life for granted, because anything can happen at any time. And you could lose all your possessions, all your belongings. So I can't say how unfortunate it is to be in that situation. But that being said, that the firefighters and the first aids and everybody that's been helping out and all the donations and all the other stuff, I'm sure has been a blessing in disguise for those that have gone and lost a lot of their things, including their homes. So I think the paramedics, like I said, the firefighters, they've done a bang-up job to try to get this thing dealt with and under control. So I just wanted to give those guys a little shout out before I continue with this. Okay, so the Rams, their defense played great, only giving up 9 points. They had 5 sacks as well, making Sam Darnold's life literally a living hell. Matthew Stafford is looking quite comfortable now after his shaky start. I did talk about how the Rams were 1-4 at the start of the season, and since week 6, they've definitely got their ish back together. So they're turning back into the Rams that everyone thought they would be. So for Matthew Stafford, he's obviously won the Super Bowl, like I talked about earlier. So he has the experience, and they are a number 4 seed, if I'm not mistaken, or the number 3 seed in the NFC. And unfortunately, they won't be able to host any games, because even if they go in, the only way the Rams could host a championship game would be if they beat Philly and Washington beat Detroit. But again, just because of what's happening in LA, if there was a championship game would it still be played in LA, or would they still have to relocate? So there'd be a lot of questions that would have to be answered if that was the case. But what I was trying to say was that, I mean, they have a great coach in Sean McVay. They have a terrific quarterback in Matthew Stafford. Cooper Kupp, he was very quiet last week, but he did win the Super Bowl MVP when the Rams defeated the Bengals. So he can easily be a threat as well on the outside. So if you're an Eagles fan, or if you're the Eagles players, don't take this Rams team for granted. That's probably going to be the one word I'm going to say, or the one phrase I'm going to say for every single one of these teams is don't take your opponent for granted, because if you do and you start looking ahead, that can bite you in the rear. Okay, so for the Eagles, they got the first playoff win since defeating the 49ers in the 2022-23 NFL Championship game. They made the playoffs last year, but they got bounced by the Buccaneers in the wild card matchup. So I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on them to get a W, especially at home. Speaking of the W, they got a huge win against the Packers last week, picking off Jordan Love 3 times and only surrendering 10 points. So both the defenses for the Rams and Eagles, they're dominating, to say the least, considering they only gave up 10 and 9 points to their respective opponents. So for the Eagles, the defense can make plays when they need it. Saquon is doing Saquon things, and Hurts, like a lot of quarterbacks, is a dual threat with his arms and his legs. He only rushed for like 30 some odd yards last week, but if he finds an opening, he'll take it, and he'll either get a touchdown or a first down. Either way, he's a threat. So I wrote down that I got Philly in this game. I think they'll take it 24-18. I think this is going to be either they score a late touchdown to take the lead, or they hold off and their defense comes away either with a stop or a pick or whatever it is. And yeah, I think the Eagles will move on to the championship game and take on the Detroit Lions. Okay, the last game takes place in Buffalo. There we go. Got my thing ready here. So for the Bills and the Ravens, the number 2 and 3 seed respectively in the AFC. Excuse me. So this is going to be the 13th time that these two teams have met. The Ravens lead the series 7-5, and they've only met one time in the postseason, and that would have been roughly 4 years ago in like the whole COVID year, 2022-21. They would meet in a divisional game, and Buffalo would win that 17-3. So once again, they're meeting in the divisional matchup with the AFC Championship game on the line. Okay, so the Ravens beat their division opponent against the Steelers in the wild card round. The Bills are coming off a huge divisional matchup against the Broncos in their wild card matchup. This could possibly be the game of the weekend. I mean, yes, the Eagles and Rams will probably be interesting. I'm not saying the other games will be boring, but just because of the threats and the weapons that both the Ravens and Bills have respectively, I'm going to put this way. There's no way this is going to be another 17-3 game. I think this is going to be a very high scoring game for both of these squads. So I guess both offenses are dominant and defenses are pretty solid as well. Jackson is a 2-time league MVP, and he's going up against Josh Allen, who is more than likely going to get the MVP for this season. So you have two very good quarterbacks competing against one another. James Cook and Derrick Henry will take center stage for both squads respectively. Both teams will have a run-heavy offense, and between the running backs and the quarterbacks, I honestly think both these teams are going to run the ball more than they're going to throw it. That's just my take. Not saying that like Josh Allen can't throw the ball or Lamar Jackson can't throw the ball. They can both throw their deep bomb, but because of how gifted both those guys are, it's going to be run heavy. There's no ands ifs or but about it. I don't think they're going to have like 40 pass attempts to like 15 rushes. I think it might be the exact opposite for both teams. Derrick Henry has definitely found his second life since he left Tennessee and joined Baltimore. And James Cook, I think he's only in his 3rd year, or maybe his 4th year. He's not that far into his career, and he had rushed over 100 yards last week. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game between both these teams, and like if I had to sit down and watch any of these four, it would have to be the Bills and the Ravens. I just think there's just so much on the line, and it'll be a fun game to watch. So I think this is going to be a very close one. I think it is still going to be a high scoring game, but I got the Ravens pulling this one out, and I'll even say it's 27-26. Maybe they get a late touchdown, the extra points ends up winning the game, or they hold on to a late lead, and then they, again, just like I talked about previously with the Rams and Eagles, maybe the Bills try to go for it and either miss a field goal or it's incomplete, turnover on downs, something like that. So I'm sure Buffalo should be favored and they could win, but they've struggled in the divisional round, especially in the Josh Allen era. They've only had one divisional win, and that was obviously against the same Ravens team that they're playing against this Sunday. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the Bills, more pressure on the Bills than there is on the Ravens. And as much as I would love to see Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes AFC Championship game, which they did do 4 years ago as well, I think a Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes rematch of last year's championship game would be that much more enticing, especially since Baltimore, I guarantee they have a chip on their shoulder since they were at home last year in the championship game, and they would have to fly to Kansas City to defeat the Chiefs en route to a possible Super Bowl appearance. So I'm going to be bold. I say the Ravens take this. Now, if Buffalo wins, would I be surprised? Not at all, because Josh Allen is a beast. Um, so, yeah, that's what I got for my picks, and I'm almost half an hour into a video where I only predicted 4 games. So when it comes to playoffs, I could talk about this all day. Honestly, if I didn't have to worry about this only being like a half an hour video, this would probably be like an hour preview for each game if I really wanted to get that more in depth with this. All right, that takes care of my predictions for the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. As always, if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative. Until next time, and as always, take care.